Hello, I'm Debbie Russ with the BBC News. NATO has urged all warring parties in Syria's Idlib province to de-escalate the situation after an upsurge in fighting between the Turkish and Syrian armies. Jens Stoltenberg called on Russia and the Syrian government to stop their offensive against rebels and end indiscriminate bombing.
We are strongly supporting and NATO allies are engaged in trying to move forward the efforts, the UN-led efforts to find a peaceful solution. And we call on Syria and Russia to fully engage in such UN-led efforts to find a peaceful solution.
Mr. Stoltenberg was speaking after 33 Turkish soldiers were killed in an overnight airstrike in Idlib. Turkey, which is a member of NATO, says the strike went ahead despite coordination with the Russians. Presidents Putin and Erdogan held urgent talks by phone this morning in an attempt to calm the situation in Idlib. Here's our defence and diplomatic correspondent, Jonathan Marcus.
A Turkish spokesman has described the Syrian airstrike on its outpost in Syria as an attack against NATO. But for all the public's sympathy with Ankara on show today at the alliance's headquarters in Brussels, that is probably not how many of Turkey's NATO allies will see things. Turkey, after all, has been pursuing a high-risk policy in Syria, accompanying all this with a diplomatic tilt towards Moscow. But the limits of this Turkish policy may now be apparent. After the tensions over recent months, NATO is clearly eager to patch up things with Ankara, but it's not going to act militarily to protect Turkish forces in Syria.
The World Health Organization says the outbreak of the coronavirus is getting bigger, and it's again warned that most, if not all, countries should expect infections. It's expressed particular concern about the situation in Iran, to where a WHO mission will be dispatched next week. But the authorities in Europe have also been reporting a sharp rise in infections. Germany and Switzerland are the latest countries to react to a growing number of cases, with new measures to limit the spread. Stock markets across Europe are registering significant losses, reflecting concern about the spread of the novel coronavirus. Germany's main index dived more than 5%, while other European indices in London, Paris and Milan dropped more than 3% on average. Theo Leggett reports.
Major markets in Europe and the United States are heading for their worst week since the financial crisis of 2008. When the virus appeared to be largely confined to Southeast Asia, there was significant concern about its impact on global supply chains, potentially creating shortages. But the markets remained largely resilient. Now that there have been significant outbreaks in other parts of the world as well, concerns are growing about the possibility of much wider and more severe disruption to businesses.
Asian shares have also traded down, with Japan's Nikkei index decreasing 4%. You're listening to the World News from the BBC. Officials in Ethiopia say 12 people have been killed and 7,000 displaced in ethnic clashes in the western state of Gambela. More than 400 houses were burned down. The clashes started after the killing of a local official. It's the final day of a week-long reduction in violence in Afghanistan, which, if successfully completed, should lead to a withdrawal of American troops from the country. Although some Afghan soldiers and civilians have been killed, there are said to have been far fewer deaths than usual and no major incident. The pact, negotiated by US officials and the Taliban, will culminate in the signing of an agreement in Qatar on Saturday. The three-time Olympic gold medal-winning Chinese swimmer Sun Yang has been banned for 8 years for a doping test infraction by the Court of Arbitration for Sport in Switzerland. Laura Scott has the details.
He has been one of the most divisive figures in world sport, and today Chinese swimmer Sun Yang has learnt he will not be swimming at the Tokyo Olympics or at any event for the next 8 years. The 28-year-old, who won 2 golds at London 2012 and another at Rio 4 years later, was found guilty of tampering with a doping control after destroying a sample of blood during an out-of-competition test in 2018. The ruling by the Court of Arbitration for Sport comes after an appeal by the World Anti-Doping Agency, who disputed the decision by swimming's world governing body FINA to only give Sun a warning for his part in the incident.
Laura Scott. Malaysia's political crisis has deepened after the Royal Palace rejected a plan by the interim leader, Mahathir Mohamad, for Parliament to vote on a new Prime Minister on Monday. Dr Mahathir resigned as Prime Minister earlier this week, breaking a coalition with his former protégé and long-term rival, Anwar Ibrahim. The move was widely seen as an attempt by the 94-year-old politician to consolidate power. BBC News.